Summer 1943. The wheat fields of Europe burned under the weight of retreat, their gold turned to ash beneath boot and tread. From those fields, where the air still reeked of smoke and iron, a line of prisoners wound its way toward captivity. Among them marched women who had once wielded pens, bandages, and typewriters more often than rifles. Their uniforms still carried the sharp creases of bureaucracy, but their eyes carried the fatigue of endless war. They had been told captivity meant starvation, chains, perhaps worse. Yet each step toward the unknown felt strangely hollow, as though the ground beneath them was shifting toward a reality none could yet name. Lieselot Bauer kept her gaze fixed forward, the tight braid at her nape prickling with sweat. 22, trained as a Red Cross nurse, she had been snatched from hospitals into chaos, patching wounds that never seemed to close. She walked with measured dignity, though her palms clenched inside her pockets, nails pressing crescent moons into her flesh. To her right was Anna Hoffman, older by nearly a decade, who had once transcribed speeches in Berlin's marble halls. Anna's lips were set in a hard line, her silence a shield sharper than any blade. The train that carried them west rattled with uncertainty. Its windows offered flashes of the world beyond barbed wire, where children chased chickens in dusty yards and farmers bent their backs to soil. When the sea finally rose to meet their gaze, it was vast and blue and merciless. The women whispered to each other that America would not be so different from the Russia they feared, only another vast land eager to humiliate its enemies. Their officers had promised them that Allied prisons would break body and spirit alike. Anna, her voice like steel, murmured, "At best, they'll throw us stale bread and lock us in cages. At worst, well, we know what they've said." Yet what greeted them on the other side was not the cruelty they had prepared for, but strangeness. Camp fences gleamed in the afternoon sun, barbed wire taut against blue skies filled with the lazy drift of clouds. Watchtowers stood rigid, yes, but within the walls there was an order that felt unervingly ordinary. Wooden barracks painted with precision, laundry lines strung neatly, and the distant crack of a baseball bat echoing like some alien music. Lisa's first sight of the mess hall almost undid her composure. Inside, a machine hummed softly, pouring pale, cold sweetness into waiting bowls. Men in khaki uniforms laughed as they scooped ice cream onto plates already heavy with meat and potatoes. On tables stood bottles of something dark and gleaming, glass beaded with condensation. She had seen the shape of such bottles once, in a Berlin café before the war, smuggled by diplomats. But here they stood openly, rows upon rows, each one marked with a bold white script, Coca-Cola. Anna's brow furrowed. "A trick," she hissed under her breath. "Propaganda. They want us to think they're merciful." Yet even she could not disguise the way her eyes lingered on the sweating glass. An American guard stepped forward, his voice carrying the rounded vowels of the Midwest. Heinz Mahler was his name, though here, in uniform, he was Henry to his fellow soldiers. His grandparents had come from Bavaria, and when he looked at the German women, there was a flicker of something unspoken in his expression. He handed out trays with a careful detachment, but when Lise met his gaze, she noticed it. Not hostility, not triumph, but a curious patience, as if he were silently asking them to see what lay beyond suspicion. Captain James Donovan watched from the side, arms folded, the brim of his cap shadowing a wry smile. He had overseen hundreds of arrivals, each group stepping through the gates with dread carved into their posture. He knew the moment well, the disbelief, the guarded awe, the way propaganda unraveled in the face of something as simple as a hot meal. He often said to his men, "We fight wars with bullets, but we win them with hamburgers." The first spoonful of ice cream passed Lisa's lips like a dream she was afraid to swallow. Vanilla, she thought of the word, the syllables soft, almost romantic. She had imagined sweetness buried forever under rubble. Here it melted too quickly, running cold across her tongue, disappearing before she could name it fully. Across the table, Anna pressed her spoon down hard, as though resisting the temptation to lift it. Finally, with a sharp motion, she tasted it. Her eyes flickered, surprise, then anger at her own reaction. "It's nothing," she muttered. "Just sugar and air." The Coca-Cola bottle was stranger still. Lise held it cautiously, as though it might explode. The glass was heavy, the cap hissing when pried open. She lifted it, tasting fizz for the first time, bubbles biting like tiny sparks. Around her, laughter rose, an American soldier teasing, "Careful, Fräulein, that's democracy in a bottle." Some of the German women chuckled nervously, others glared, unsure if the joke was insult or invitation. As days passed, contrasts sharpened. The prisoners were fed 3 meals a day, more calories than their families back home could dream of. The guards were firm but not cruel, speaking casually about baseball scores, movie stars, or dances on Saturday nights. To the women, it felt like stepping into a parallel universe where war existed only at the edges of newspaper headlines. Yet the barbed wire reminded them always, this was not freedom, only a taste of it, given sparingly like a strange mercy. Anna remained suspicious, her bitterness a weight she refused to set down. "They fatten us like livestock," she whispered one night in the barracks. "Don't you see? To show their people how civilized they are. Nothing here is real." But Lise could not shake the memory of the fizz against her lips, the cream dissolving into sweetness she had never known. If it was propaganda, it was made of flavors she longed to taste again. One evening, as dusk painted the camp in rose and indigo, Heinz lingered near the wire. He heard the German women humming a song from home, soft, hesitant, almost mournful. He recognized the tune, his grandmother's lullaby. For a moment he stood still, his heart straddling 2 worlds. Then, quietly, he whistled along from the other side of the fence. The women fell silent, startled. Anna narrowed her eyes, muttering, "Traitor!" But Lise tilted her head, her expression unreadable, her hands gripping the wire as though testing its strength. The war outside raged on, streets flattened in Hamburg, soldiers freezing in the east. But within the camp, the greatest shock was not violence but abundance. Ice cream cones passed through hands that had once rationed stale bread. Coca-Cola caps snapped open in time with laughter they did not trust. And yet, beneath the suspicion and irony, a question began to take root in Lisa's mind. If the enemy could give sweetness so freely, what else in the world had been hidden from her? The night air smelled faintly of pine and machine oil, the hum of the ice cream maker drifting like an odd lullaby through the barracks walls. Lise closed her eyes, her tongue still remembering the cold rush of vanilla. For the first time since capture, her fear loosened its grip. But as she drifted toward uneasy sleep, a guard's shout echoed from the far side of camp. Something had arrived, something that would remind them all that paradise, even when served in scoops and bottles, was only ever temporary. The mornings began with a clang of the mess bell, its metallic cry rolling over the camp like a summons no one could ignore. The women stirred from cots lined with coarse blankets, their bodies still stiff with the memory of marches and trains. Yet the air in the American camp carried no scent of fear, only the earthy tang of coffee brewing, the buttery promise of scrambled eggs, the sweet drift of syrup poured over pancakes. For Lieselot Bauer, each step toward the mess hall was a negotiation between hunger and pride, her stomach urging forward while her conscience whispered caution. Inside, the abundance was obscene. Platters of meatloaf, bowls of mashed potatoes whipped to cream, pies whose crusts flaked under the press of a fork. And always, waiting like sentries at the end of the line, bottles of Coca-Cola. The glass glistened with cold droplets, promising refreshment in a way no propaganda leaflet ever could. The women accepted their trays with the stiff posture of soldiers but ate like the civilians they had once been, spoonfuls carried quickly to mouths as if afraid the bounty might vanish. Anna Hoffmann remained a fortress. She ate deliberately, chewing with the slow disdain of someone who would not be conquered by sweetness. Her eyes lingered not on the food but on the guards, studying their movements, searching for cruelty hidden beneath the smiles. She whispered sharp observations to the others. The way the guard's hand rested on his rifle, the way the tower's spotlight swept the yard in precise arcs each night. "Do not forget," she said, "a cage gilded in sugar is still a cage." Yet not all shared her suspicion. In the afternoons, after chores and roll call, the camp opened into something resembling normal life. American officers organized classes, English lessons, sewing workshops, even lectures on democracy. For the men, there were labor details outside the wire, but for the women, hours drifted into strange freedoms. They braided one another's hair, stitched torn hems, or sat by the barracks window to watch baseball games in the distance. The crack of the bat was foreign music, rhythmic and joyous, echoing against the wire as if mocking its purpose. Lise found herself captivated not by the rules of the game but by its energy. She watched the players run in loops, faces lit with laughter that seemed to exist outside war. One afternoon, Heinz Mahler stood nearby, his cap tilted back, explaining in halting German. "You see, 3 strikes and you're out. But, if you run fast, you are safe." His words carried an accidental poetry, and Lise smiled despite herself. Anna, overhearing, scoffed. "Safe? In this place?" She turned away, yet the corner of her mouth betrayed a flicker of envy at Lise's ease. Numbers underpinned the contradictions. Back home, ration books dictated lives, 800 calories a day if one was lucky. Here, prisoners consumed more than 3,000. Lise remembered her mother's letters, the ink smudged with desperation, bread stretched with sawdust, children fainting in schoolrooms. Each bite of pie in the camp was heavy with guilt, a sweetness laced with sorrow. She wrote carefully in her own letters, omitting mention of ice cream or soda, knowing the truth would cut deeper than any weapon. Still, truth seeped into her. One evening, after supper, she sat outside the barracks, sipping from a Coca-Cola bottle. The fizz tickled her throat, bubbles rising like laughter she had forgotten how to make. She tipped her head back, watching the sunset paint the sky in streaks of copper and violet. For a moment, she felt herself suspended between 2 worlds, the ashes of Europe and this improbable oasis. Anna joined her reluctantly, arms folded, gaze sharp. "You are forgetting yourself," she warned. Lise answered quietly, "Perhaps I am remembering who I once was." Camp life blurred boundaries between captivity and ordinary living. Music spilled from radios in the guard huts, swing tunes with trumpets that lifted spirits even when lyrics were incomprehensible. Some nights, Americans set up dances, inviting civilian volunteers from nearby towns to mingle with prisoners. The women watched from shadows, the rhythm tugging at their bones, a reminder of youth wasted on uniforms. Lise swayed unconsciously, and Anna caught her shoulder, gripping it like an anchor. "Do not let them seduce you," she hissed. But even Anna's eyes lingered on the spinning skirts, the quicksilver joy of strangers who had never heard bombs fall. Rumors circulated with the smoke of campfires. Some men embraced re-education classes, fascinated by talk of freedom and individual rights. Others seethed, clinging to ideology like a lifeline. The women stood between, uncertain which path to follow. Lise felt the tug of curiosity, the dangerous desire to believe in kindness. Anna clung to defiance, convinced it was the only armor left to her. The surveillance was constant. Spotlights swept the barracks at night, boots crunched along patrol paths, towers loomed like silent judges. Yet within those confines, life bloomed in odd, defiant ways. One woman painted scenes of home on scraps of cardboard, another composed poems about the absurdity of ice cream in a prison. Humor sparked like flint. They nicknamed Coca-Cola Kriegsoft, war juice, and laughed softly at the irony of drinking the enemy's pride from glass bottles. Even Anna cracked a smile once, though she buried it quickly beneath her scowl. Lise began to sense that survival here was not about enduring hunger or violence, but about navigating abundance without losing oneself. Sweetness was as dangerous as bullets, for it blurred the line between enemy and benefactor. Each sip of soda softened resistance, each scoop of ice cream melted suspicion. She wrestled with the guilt of enjoyment, the betrayal it seemed to represent, and the fragile hope it carried. One night, lying on her cot, she listened to the distant hum of the ice cream machine, steady as a heartbeat. The sound was absurd in its comfort, yet it lulled her, threading into dreams of gardens and laughter. She awoke with Anna's voice in her ear, harsh and certain. "They want you to forget the rubble. But the rubble is all that waits for us." Lise turned her face toward the window. Beyond the wire, the guard towers glowed like watchful eyes. She thought of Heinz's clumsy German, of Donovan's wry smile, of the sweetness dissolving too fast on her tongue. She could not decide which was more dangerous, the fences that held her body, or the abundance that threatened to claim her heart. Then, in the hush before dawn, a new sound broke the rhythm of camp life, the roar of trucks pulling up outside the wire. Headlights swept across the barracks, blinding and sudden, casting long shadows over the cots. The women sat up, their breath quickening, trays of half-written letters scattered to the floor. Orders barked in English, boots striking the ground with urgency. Something had arrived, and with it, the fragile illusion of sweetness shuddered. The women glanced at one another, hearts tightening. Whatever piece the ice cream and Coca-Cola had promised was about to be tested, and none could yet say whether comfort had made them stronger, or only more vulnerable. The trucks that had thundered into camp did not carry executioners or shackles but crates, endless stacks of supplies that smelled faintly of cardboard and sugar. The women watched as soldiers unloaded them, sweat darkening their khaki shirts, their laughter easy and unguarded. The boxes bore the familiar cursive letters, Coca-Cola. Alongside them came tins of peaches, sacks of flour, barrels of coffee. It was a reminder that while Europe withered, this country overflowed. That abundance filled the women's bowls, yet it also unsettled their loyalties, pressing questions into the silence of their nights. Lieselot Bauer felt those questions stirring in her chest with each sip of soda. She no longer recoiled from the fizz but welcomed it, the bubbles pricking her throat like sparks of something dangerously alive. She caught herself laughing more often, her smile uncoiling when she saw Heinz Mahler stumble through his German explanations or when swing music spilled from a radio. And every time she laughed, guilt followed close behind, sharp as glass. Her letters home grew harder to write. How could she confess to her mother that captivity fed her better than freedom had? Anna Hoffman noticed the change and despised it. She sharpened her words into weapons, striking at Lise and anyone else whose eyes softened toward their captors. "Do you think kindness erases bombs?" she snapped one evening, her voice slicing through the barracks. "They destroy our cities by day and charm us with sugar by night. It is a theater. And you," her gaze pinned Lise, "you are the audience they crave." The other women shifted uneasily, unwilling to side openly with either, their loyalties splintering in quiet ways. The camp itself seemed to conspire in this division. The Americans organized lectures where prisoners could hear about democracy, freedom of speech, even the mechanics of elections. Some of the men attended eagerly, scribbling notes, asking questions. Others scoffed, muttering that it was brainwashing. For the women, the choice was subtler, but no less fraught. To listen was to admit curiosity. To refuse was to remain steadfast but empty. Lise attended once, sitting at the back, her ears prickling at phrases like rights of the individual and government by the people. She had been taught only the chorus of obedience. These new notes startled her with their strangeness. That night she confessed to Heinz, who lingered by the wire with a cigarette glowing between his fingers. "It sounded different," she admitted softly, "as if life could belong to me, not only to orders." Heinz exhaled smoke into the twilight. "That's the idea," he said simply. His accent bent the German words awkwardly, but the sincerity in his eyes held steady. Lise looked at the ground, fearing Anna might be watching. Yet part of her wanted to hold on to that sentence the way she held the bottle of soda, with both hands, afraid to drop it. Anna's resistance deepened with every crack she saw in others. She gathered a small circle around her, women who muttered darkly about traitors and vowed to return home unchanged. They shared stories of German victories long since undone, clinging to rumors that kept pride alive. "Better rubble than chains," Anna insisted, her voice carrying the weight of someone who refused to surrender even to kindness. But her conviction trembled at night, when she dreamed of Berlin's streets burning, and woke to the smell of cinnamon drifting from the American kitchen. Holidays blurred the line between captivity and parody. At Christmas, the Americans decorated the mess hall with garlands, set up a tree strung with popcorn, even handed out small gifts: soap, candy, cigarettes. On each table stood Coca-Cola bottles with red caps, dressed in paper Santa hats. The women stared at them in silence, the absurdity almost unbearable. Some laughed, others cried. Lise raised hers cautiously, the fizz popping like sleigh bells in her ears. "Frau Weihnachten," Heinz said gently from across the room, his voice carrying a warmth that startled her. Anna clenched her fists, refusing the bottle altogether. Later she muttered, "Do not let them rewrite what Christmas means. Do not let them make you forget." The conflict deepened in letters that trickled from home. They spoke of hunger, of black markets, of children too thin to stand. Lisa's sister wrote that their mother rationed herself to keep the youngest alive. Reading the words, Lise felt the weight of the pie she had eaten hours earlier sit like lead in her stomach. She wanted to send food through the envelope, to trade every drop of soda for a crust of bread in her mother's hands. Instead she folded the letter carefully, hiding it beneath her pillow, and ate in silence the next day, her appetite spoiled by shame. But shame was not enough to silence her curiosity. One evening, a radio played Benny Goodman, the clarinet swooping through the camp air like a dare. Lise allowed herself to sway, just slightly, her body remembering dances before uniforms. Anna noticed and seized her wrist. "Do you want to be American?" she hissed. Lise met her gaze, startled by the vehemence. "I want to be human," she whispered back. The words hung between them, dangerous and fragile, and for once Anna had no retort. Humor still sparked, though it carried an edge. The women joked about their diet, saying they would return to Germany round as dumplings while their families wasted away. They called the ice cream machine the miracle engine, and teased Heinz about explaining baseball for the 100th time. Even Anna laughed once when an old sergeant grumbled that Germany had lost the war not to tanks but to vanilla. Yet the laughter was brittle, like glass ready to shatter. Beneath it lay the awareness that every indulgence was a betrayal of the ruins waiting across the ocean. The barbed wire cut the horizon, a reminder that all sweetness came with conditions. Guards patrolled, spotlights swept, and rules remained firm. A prisoner caught trying to escape was brought back bloodied, and though he was treated medically, the sight silenced the camp. The women were reminded that kindness did not cancel power, that Coca-Cola could not dissolve the steel of fences. For Lise, it was a sobering reminder. For Anna, it was proof of her warnings. "You see," she told the barracks, "the sugar is only to dull your senses. The wire is the truth." Yet even Anna could not silence the questions forming in others. What if the truth was more complicated? What if kindness and cruelty could coexist, each real, each undeniable? Lise lay awake at night, her heart tugged between guilt and possibility. She imagined her mother receiving parcels of food, imagined walking free into a world where she could choose her own path. But she also heard Anna's voice, fierce and unyielding. To accept kindness was to betray loyalty, to weaken the memory of those suffering at home. The divide grew sharper each day, the camp split by invisible lines. Some leaned toward curiosity, others clung to defiance. Between them stretched a silence thick with suspicion. Heinz sensed it too, his footsteps heavier when he patrolled, his eyes lingering on Lise with quiet worry. Captain Donovan observed with his usual wry detachment, noting in his reports that the women wrestle more with loyalty than hunger. He knew it was a battle fought silently, spoonful by spoonful. Spring crept into the camp, bringing blossoms beyond the wire, their scent drifting faintly into the barracks. Life pressed forward with an indifferent grace. The women watched buds unfurl while their loyalties tangled further, as fragile and contested as the flowers themselves. Lise bent once to pick a petal that had blown through the fence, holding it gently in her palm. Anna saw her, and their eyes met, one filled with wonder, the other with warning. That night, as darkness cloaked the camp, news arrived on a smuggled scrap of paper passed from one prisoner to another. Germany was faltering, cities burning, fronts collapsing. The women read in silence, the words heavy with inevitability. Anna clenched the note in her fist, her jaw rigid. Lise felt her breath catch, the sweetness of Coca-Cola still on her tongue. If the war was crumbling, then soon the gates would open. But to what? The question struck her with a force greater than any bomb. As she closed her eyes, the fizz still lingered on her lips, and she understood that the real captivity was not the wire. It was the choice she would soon be forced to make. The spring of 1945 arrived not with blossoms but with rumors. Rumors carried in half-torn newspapers, in whispered scraps of radio broadcasts, in the restless silence of guards who no longer laughed as easily. For months the camp had felt like a strange island of abundance, insulated from the collapse of the Reich. Yet now the illusion thinned. Even within the barbed wire, the women could sense the world tilting, as if history itself had decided to sprint toward its ending. Lieselot Bauer felt it most acutely in the letters that stopped coming. Her mother's handwriting had grown more frantic, lines crammed with worry and hunger, but then the words simply ceased. The last letter spoke of the sound of sirens over Hamburg, of neighbors vanishing beneath rubble, of children faint with hunger. No reply followed. Each day Lise checked the mail, her hands trembling as she touched the empty stack. Food here filled her body, but silence hollowed her heart. She clung to the memory of her mother's voice even as it blurred, fearing it might vanish altogether. Anna Hoffman, by contrast, hardened with every rumor of German defeat. Where others allowed hope or sorrow to soften them, she built her armor thicker. "They want us weak," she told the barracks, her voice edged with iron. "They want us grateful, so that when Germany falls, we no longer remember who we are. Don't let them win in here, too." Yet even Anna's fire wavered when she heard that Berlin was burning. One night, Lise found her clutching a small locket in the dark, whispering a name she would never confess aloud. Beneath the mask of defiance lay grief she dared not share. The camp itself reflected the shifting world. Supplies remained abundant, but the guards moved with tension, their voices sharper, their radios tuned constantly to news reports. Heinz Mahler, the German-American guard who had once explained baseball with boyish earnestness, now carried a heaviness in his shoulders. His glances toward Lise grew longer, tinged with something unspoken. Once, when he brought her a bottle of Coca-Cola, his hand lingered a heartbeat too long as it passed into hers. Neither spoke, but the air between them vibrated with everything they could not say. Captain Donovan continued his routines with practiced detachment, but even he betrayed signs of unease. He no longer joked about hamburgers winning wars. His reports grew clipped, and he walked the camp with the stride of a man measuring time. Lee sometimes caught him studying the prisoners not as captives but as futures, women who would soon step into a ruined homeland, carrying impressions of America in their bones. He seemed to wonder what stories they would tell when the gates opened. Then, one morning, the announcement came. Germany had surrendered. The war, at least on this side of the ocean, was over. The words dropped into the camp like stones into still water, sending ripples through every soul. The guards cheered, raising their rifles skyward, laughter spilling over fences. The prisoners, by contrast, stood stunned, faces pale, eyes wide with the recognition that everything they knew, good or bad, was gone. For Lise, the news struck like both a blessing and a curse. The war that had consumed her youth was finished, yet the thought of returning home filled her with dread. Home was rubble, hunger, silence where her mother's voice should be. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the beat of her heart quicken, uncertain whether it pulsed with hope or terror. Anna's reaction was immediate. "Do you see?" she hissed, gripping Lisa's arm with bruising force. "They'll send us back now, back to nothing. All this," she gestured at the camp, at the food, the beds, the sweetness, "was only a performance to make us forget what waited. Do not be fooled by their smiles. Our suffering begins again the moment we leave these fences." The days that followed blurred with preparations. Orders circulated. The women would be repatriated, returned to Germany by ship. They packed their meager belongings, letters, scraps of fabric, sketches from idle afternoons. Some wept quietly, others moved with rigid discipline. The barracks, once filled with the hum of routine, now trembled with the weight of anticipation. Each woman understood she was about to exchange abundance for ashes. On the last evening, the Americans held a final supper in the mess hall. The tables sagged with food, roast chicken, buttered corn, pies crowned with cream. And in the center of each table, bottles of Coca-Cola stood in neat rows, their glass glistening as if lit from within. The women sat silently at first, unable to bridge the chasm between their full plates and the starvation waiting across the ocean. Then Donovan raised his voice, steady and formal. "Ladies, tomorrow you go home. Tonight, we share a meal as a farewell. May it remind you not of captivity, but of possibility." The words struck Lise deeply. She looked around at the women she had lived beside, at Anna's rigid silhouette, at Heinz leaning in the doorway with unreadable eyes. She lifted her bottle slowly, unscrewing the cap. The hiss echoed in the silence, sharp and final, like the release of something long contained. The others followed, one by one, until the hall filled with the chorus of fizzing glass. She took a sip. The bubbles raced across her tongue, familiar now yet still startling, the taste of a world that seemed impossibly far from the ruins awaiting her. She thought of her mother, of hunger, of letters gone silent. She thought of Heinz's hand brushing hers, of Donovan's quiet conviction. And she understood that this sweetness was not just sugar, it was memory, it was choice, it was the fragile possibility of life after rubble. Anna refused her bottle until the very end. She sat rigid, arms crossed, eyes blazing. But when silence stretched too long, she reached out suddenly, unscrewing the cap with a sharp twist. She lifted it high, her voice cutting through the hall. "For Germany," she said bitterly, and drank. The gesture was both defiance and surrender, a confession that even she could not resist the pull of sweetness, though she cloaked it in anger. That night, sleep did not come easily. The barracks echoed with whispered prayers, muffled sobs, nervous laughter. Lise lay awake, the last sip still tingling in her mouth, as if it had branded her tongue with memory. She heard footsteps outside, paused at the door, and then Heinz's voice, soft, almost breaking, "You will see America again one day." She did not answer, but her heart surged with a dangerous hope, one she buried beneath her blanket. At dawn, the trucks arrived. The women filed out, their breaths clouding in the cool air, their belongings bundled tight. Guards lined the path, their faces solemn now, stripped of victory's joy. Donovan stood at the gate, hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the women as if memorizing each face. When Lise passed, he gave a single nod, an acknowledgement, a farewell, perhaps a silent wish. Before boarding, each prisoner was handed a final gift: one bottle of Coca-Cola. The glass was cold against their palms, condensation wetting their skin. Lise held hers tightly, as though it were both anchor and torch. Around her, women clutched theirs with the reverence of relics. Anna sneered, muttering that it was nothing but sugar water, yet even she gripped her bottle as if it contained something more. The trucks rumbled forward, carrying them toward ships, toward ruin, toward futures none could yet imagine. Lise sat with the bottle pressed to her chest, the hum of the engine vibrating through her bones. She closed her eyes and thought of ice cream melting, of swing music drifting through wire, of laughter that had returned when she least expected it. She thought of her mother, of hunger, of rebuilding. And she thought of the hiss of the cap, the fizz that rose like a promise. As the camp receded into distance, the fences shrinking against the horizon, she understood that the war had carved scars she would carry forever. Yet in her hand she held a symbol of something larger than captivity, a memory of sweetness in the midst of ruin, a reminder that even in chains, she had glimpsed another world. She lifted the bottle to her lips, savoring the last sip. It burned and sparkled, both too sweet and too fleeting, a taste that would haunt her long after the glass was empty. And in that moment, as dawn split the horizon with light, Lise realized that this was not an ending but a threshold. The wire no longer held her. The true test waited beyond. The truck jolted, the bottle clinked against her teeth, and she swallowed hard. She turned her face toward the uncertain road, her eyes wet but unblinking. The world was broken, but somewhere within its ruins, a promise had been made, a promise as fragile and explosive as the fizz in her throat. And though she could not yet name it, she knew she would spend the rest of her life chasing its echo.